Welcome to another episode of Bonfire Conversations. I'm your host, Hami Trezani Kufar, and today I'm thrilled to bring you a conversation with the incredibly talented Ashley Poprik. Ashley is a rising star in the video game industry, having made her mark as a writer on major titles like Modern Warfare 3, Marvel's SpiderMan 2, and most recently, Call of Duty Black Ops 6. In our discussion, we dive into her journey from creating short films to shaping the narratives of some of the gaming's most iconic franchises. Ashley shares her insights on the creative challenges of writing for blockbuster games, collaborating with large teams, and research that goes into crafting authentic military stories. We also touch on her unique process of building compelling character arcs and her approach to naming in-game elements. This episode is full of valuable takeaways for aspiring writers and a fascinating behind-the-scenes look at the making of AAA games. It was a pleasure speaking with Ashley, and I'm sure you'll find this conversation as engaging as I did. Before we begin, please make sure to subscribe to Bonfire Conversations if you're enjoying the show. Here's my conversation with Ashley Poprik.
Hello, welcome to Bonfire Conversations, Ashley. It's so nice to finally talk to you. I've been following your journey for a while now, and I love your energy, growth, and the incredible work you've been doing. And congratulations to the recent release of Call of Duty Black Ops 6, which was a massive hit, and I enjoyed every second of it.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me. It's been great. We've just been talking over email, but it's great to actually get to talk to you, face to face, however, online that is.
Yeah, it's great. So to start with, let's go back and look at your journey up to this point. How did you break into video game industry and so quickly find yourself writing for major titles like Call of Duty and SpiderMan?
Thank you. Yeah, it was incredibly fast. So I had kind of always been doing just like little writing things. I was a very cringe child and would make like basically fan fiction, and like I would just be so into video game worlds and also like television show worlds that I was just also writing stories that were kind of in them. I was not a very popular kid. And as I got older, I realized that this was something that I could do, professionally and actually get paid for it. And so I was kind of more on the film side of things just because I didn't really put together that somebody had to create the stories that I was loving in video games so much. It just never occurred to me, in my head, I was just like, oh yeah, they're just there. They're great, and so I went to college actually for screenwriting. And when I was there, I found out that, basically I liked screenwriting, but I really wanted to do video games somehow. And I just didn't know kind of the tech side of how to do things. But within kind of the beginning of that very first semester of me being in there, I heard about video game writing and realized like, oh, that's a thing. And basically from the day that I found that out, I've wanted to be a game writer. And so I really kind of hit the ground running, because that was just like, I've always been kind of like very tunnel vision, not really having a plan B. And so it was like, okay, I want to be a game writer and I want to be making the stories that I love so much. And so how do I get there? And from there, kind of in college, I was doing a bunch of just like smaller projects, like game jams, which are just kind of games that you make in a weekend, and then also short films. And I even made like a little television show, because locally we had essentially a television program that was only run by students of our college, which was really strange but fun. And I kind of, with the mix of that, kept growing, was able to catch the eye of Insomniac Games. So then I was working with them for a bit on Marvel Spider-Man 2, and that was the first time that I had been in like a very large studio setting. It wasn't just like small contract projects. working with groups of like maybe 5 or 6. It was much bigger than that and much larger scale. And then from there, I was like, okay, I want to do this forever, and had 1 semester left, graduated, and kind of been working full time in games since.
Wow, that's so inspiring. And actually, I've watched all of your short films, and they're really fun. And you have such a unique sense of humor. How have these short films helped you in your career, both from writing perspective and in getting your work noticed by others?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for watching them. I know quality wise, they're nothing to to necessarily write home about, but they were very fun, and they were super useful for me because I had been writing just kind of on a page, and there's so much that you don't really see about writing until you actually are making it. For example, with a lot of honestly like comedy and any sort of humor writing I was working on, it would sound like amazing on a script, and I would have friends and like teachers read it, and they would be, cackling, and it would be a great time, and people would be really excited to see it. And then I would make it, and all of a sudden, like it wasn't funny anymore, and it was very bizarre because I was like, what happened? I put everything word for word on the script to the screen, and there's just a different kind of level of writing for things that are funny just by reading them versus being able to like see them, and you have to incorporate the timing of things and how things land, and depending on kind of the performers, how are they going to be conveying this information? And so I made so many short films, and honestly, I learned a lot through failure and seeing kind of how they came out, and just like taking note of what worked and what didn't. And it has become super useful actually when making video game writing, because so much of it is based on timing and performance. Every single thing that we're making, we have to put like to the exact point of where the player is like entering, where that line of dialogue is going to be playing, or where that conversation is going to be happening. So everything is almost built by like geolocation. And if you have things that are not landing at the right time, or playing when the player is kind of associating that connotation with it, then it's just confusing, and it ends up not conveying what we want to tell. You end up losing a lot of emotion, and sometimes if the player is engaged in something, if we're giving them a lot of conversation during like a combat mission per se, they won't listen because they're so engaged in just what it is that they're doing that they're not really paying attention to anything else. So it really helped me find timing wise, where are places that I can put these story moments where the audience is going to be able to register it the best, where it makes the most sense. And also when you have such a small amount of time to have any sort of like dialogue or action, when you're thinking of cinematics, they can cost, millions of dollars to make, even though they're just a couple minutes long. So you have to be very, very sparing with them and everything that you write. And the short films really helped me with that. That's something that I see, especially if people have backgrounds in like movie making, or being a novelist. That's something that they struggle with a lot, trying to get into game writing, because you're now having to really decide what words specifically are important. How do you get to like the meat and core of it? And in terms of timing, like where is kind of the best place to put it? Because a lot of screenwriters, especially, they'll write the script for their movie and then they'll sell it, and then that's kind of that. They don't have anything else to do with the project, and so it's not something that they have to think about very much. But when you're working in games, we're in it the entire time, so we have to know where those things are going to be and the perfect timing.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember I went to film school, and for our first short film, I remember I wrote a perfect screenplay. I had like hired like 10, 12 people, professionals, to just shoot this movie. And I was like, this is going to be perfect. And the moment the camera started rolling, and I said, oh my God, everything is different. I mean, this guy's supposed to just walk over to that room. Why is it taking so long? Or the amount of information that I'm suddenly giving to the viewer is so much. And it's all about timing. It's like, oh, this is so short. This is too long. This is just barely noticed that. And especially in editing, when I was like editing, it was like nothing works. And one after another, I made, and the next short film, I was like, all right, I know the timing is gonna be like that, and suddenly you're like, oh, it's in a different genre now. It's a horror, and the timing is different now. So it's exactly. I think it was very helpful in your case, and as you've mentioned, for example, Call of Duty is the perfect example of that. I mean, I was focused on that story, and everything. This is just the middle of the war, and I knew what's going on. The lines were delivered perfectly. The timing was perfect. Yeah. That's a great experience. So
yeah, the performers were incredible. Getting to sit in those sessions is one of my favorite things about being a game writer, is just seeing everything you wrote get performed by people who have been playing your favorite characters forever. It's a surreal feeling.
Yeah. So most of the games you worked on have been huge productions with so many writers involved. I'm curious, how does the writing process work on large scale games like Call of Duty, where multiple people are contributing to different parts of the story?
It's very similar actually to television writing, crazy enough. And some of that is just because, I mean, especially when you're having a full team. I mean, we had a pretty sizable team for Marvel Spider-Man 2. And kind of similar to how a television writer's room works. We have a writer's room, and there's, the overall big story and kind of like the arcs and what the pillars of that game narrative is supposed to give you. But then it is divided up kind of similar to episodes, but they're in different levels to each writer, and they're assigned kind of like, okay, we need this this player to get from point A to point B in this mission. Here you go. How are you going to encapsulate the full story in just kind of like this small episode, and what can you bring in here that is interesting and has, kind of a beginning and an end, but still has on the outside like some story pieces that are carried through, and being passed on to the next writers, whoever is in charge of like the missions ahead. So it feels like everybody is almost we're all working on a puzzle, but we're each making a different puzzle piece. And then it's our job to kind of come together and smooth those edges out and make sure that they actually fit correctly. One of the things that's really difficult about working just with like a big team is sometimes, depending on how fast the game is going to be coming out, you are kind of focused so much on just your work that you aren't communicating with everybody, and they're also heads down really focusing on their work. And then at some point you come together and you're putting your puzzle pieces together, and they just don't fit at all. And then you have to come together as a team and be like, okay, well, how are we going to straighten this out and make it a cohesive story, have it be like all one piece by, the time we ship the game. And it's a lot of extra moving pieces, but then it's also really rewarding because for me personally, a lot of people will talk about like, oh, I'm the idea person, and I always have like the best ideas, and I'm always thinking of like cool new creative things. I personally cannot think of ideas until I'm brainstorming with somebody else. Like I kind of need the foundations a little bit. I kind of call it like a sandbox you give me like the sandbox and I'll make a really cool castle, but if you just kind of like just throw me on nothing, I'm gonna be like, oh, I don't. There's too much to do. I work really well in a team, and you're able to take those ideas that you're maybe having or that other writers are having, and you're able to build off of them. You're able to give feedback on like what works and what doesn't, and it helps so that, similar to kind of how I had it in the short films, like you're not getting to the end of the project and realizing that nothing is working. You're having extra eyes on it, and that could be really rewarding and kind of helps contribute to a larger story as a whole as well. I feel like, being able to talk to other writers who have their own kind of experiences and their own nuances as well, whether we're going over, large overarching story stuff or like really minute, like going through every single line of a script. It's nice to have that kind of under a second professional eye, especially because they also, they're also writers, and their focus is having the best story possible. As opposed to, some smaller studios, they don't have a full team of writers. I have worked at some studios where I was the only writer, and it can be rewarding in some other ways. I get to have full creative freedom, and like I get to kind of think about the full overarching story, and it's nice to just kind of like have that ownership of everything because it's kind of solely in my vision. But then on the other side, because I'm the only one who's really hired to be the champion of story, it can be difficult because, one of the biggest kind of things that a writer does, one of our major tasks is to work with a game designer. And the game designer is not focused on making the best story. They're focused on making the game fun, right? Because a game that's not fun just is a bad game, whereas a game that's fun but has a bad story is still a good game. And so I can be trying to pitch certain story moments, or, oh, this character is, flawed in this way, and maybe he really likes this sort of thing but has like a fear of this. And then, from a gameplay standpoint, it's like if the player doesn't know how to swim, then the mechanics wise, we shouldn't be having the player swim. And you have to make sure that those things kind of make sense and come together. And not everything that the writer narrative group kind of wants is going to be what is best for gameplay. And that can be a little bit tense, especially when you're kind of in the moment, because you have these two very different goals. And you're trying to come together because at the end of the day, you're trying to make a great game. But you have different ways of kind of getting there, and finding ways to work with the other disciplines can be a challenge sometimes just because there's so many moving parts. And that's, again, something that screenwriters don't necessarily have to deal with, right? Because they just write it and then they send it away, and then usually a team just kind of does it. But we're in it all the way through from pre-production to ship. And yeah, it can be a bit of a struggle, but it's also very rewarding, kind of depending on the size of the team that you have.
Yeah, it's very interesting that your strength is teamwork and writing with others, and that's really helpful, especially in a project like Call of Duty that you're working on. So you've written for 2 military games so far, Modern Warfare 3 and Black Ops 6. To write compelling stories for these kinds of games, do you focus more on politics, or do you spend a lot of time researching military operations? How do you stay inspired when dealing with such intense topics?
Yeah, it can be. Honestly, when I first started, I was very intimidated by it because my family has never had a military background. I honestly feel like compared to other people that I just know in my life, because I grew up in Texas in a a city that had a military base in it. I just felt like I had less experience or knowledge of the military than a lot of people that I grew up with. But we have one of the benefits of being part of Call of Duty specifically is we have a whole lot of resources. And so they have experienced military like Navy SEALs and Marines and specialists on just basically on call for you to ask questions to, especially if it's talking about like just kind of the processes for, okay, when you're carrying out a mission, what are some things that you would avoid? What are some conditions that would make you basically abort mission entirely? Because we are, of course, wanting to root it more in realism than some other military games. And of course, it's not one-to-one at all. I mean, we're, of course, focused on making it entertaining and fun. And if it's too military simulator, it could be, there's a lot more that goes into that. But we get to have kind of those talks. And then on the other side, we're researching a lot of military missions, with specifically kind of more of the Black Ops games. They're focused on kind of like the CIA and brainwashing and all that stuff. And so we're researching a lot about the history of that and what it was that the CIA operatives were doing, what their goals were, and kind of what some of the failings were of that as well.
Yeah, awesome. And by the way, did you get a chance to work with Brian Bloom?
Oh, yeah. He is kind of the narrative director of Call of Duty as a whole.
Yeah.
And yeah, he was incredibly involved with the Modern Warfare 3 campaign. Yeah, he is just in general, he has been very involved kind of in the Warfare series for, forever it feels like.
Yeah. All right. So creating character arcs is a key part of your job as a writer. When do you decide that a character needs an arc, and how do you determine who writes which character? How do you ensure that the characters written by different team members connect with seamlessly with the story's structure?
Yeah. I personally believe that every character should have an arc of some sort. And usually when you are interacting with just other writers, that is the goal, is even though it might not be the spotlight of that game, you're still having every character kind of going through something and eventually towards the end of the game, like learning it and overcoming and changing. Especially not necessarily for multiplayer. There are different rules there, just because it's an ongoing product. And so they don't want to put like a story end on something. But for single player, like we do have an end. And so we want them to come out different than how they were at the start of the game. And that can kind of vary depending on what the gameplay is looking like. Something that I push for a lot in specifically Call of Duty games, we're in these combat situations. And so they're all basically risking their lives and having to be in these like super high combat areas. So of course they're going to have kind of thoughts on that. And it's going to be like an emotional time. Of course they're trained professionals, so they're not going to be, like running for their life scared or, crying or anything like that. But it's still just like a very high stress environment. And so seeing how the characters react to that and how they're kind of reacting to the other team members is something that we focus on when it comes to how to assign a character to writers. Sometimes there are some studios that instead of essentially like assigning an episode or a level to them, they'll assign a character. I think they do that a lot with like the the BioWare games is it's like, okay, in this overall story, you are going to be focused on this player, and it is your job to kind of like embed that into everything. And it is usually given to somebody who has kind of the closest experience with whatever arc it is that they're trying to go through. So, for example, if a character is going through grief, is there somebody who is on the team who has gone through grief and has something to say about it that could make that character feel human? When I was at Insomniac, one of the big things that I was working on was for Miles and Genki, because they're younger. They were trying to deal with basically, what do I do after this, milestone of my life that is school? What is the rest of my life going to be looking like? And that transition kind of into adulthood. And that was partially because I, one, had just experienced that, but two, was kind of still experiencing it almost, because I was coming to the end of my college career and was kind of like, okay, what, I know what I want and what I like, but what's the rest of my life going to look like? Now I'm not geo-locked into a different city. I can go anywhere, but I still have like family to deal with. And what about my friends? And there was just like so much kind of on, it almost feels like it's like so much on your shoulders. And the way that Miles and his friends kind of deal with that are very differently, right? Miles is kind of just like shoving that away because he's like, I have to be Spider-Man as well, and that's like a really big responsibility for him. And not only is it something that, he has to step into, but also it's kind of a crutch for him too. He's kind of using it as a shield. Anytime that there is something kind of hard going on, it is immediately overshadowed by being Spider-Man, right? And that was something that I feel like I just had more of like kind of like emotional connection to. And so that was what I got to focus on a lot more. And then when you are kind of making that story, again, we're pitching that to the narrative team, and we're pitching it to different disciplines as well, because, I, as well as a lot of people just at Insomniac as well, we're very firm believers of the idea that everybody is a storyteller. We are, of course, writing that, but every single person that is making that game is going to be kind of touching upon the characters in a specific way. So, in animation, like, they're the ones that are having to animate their mannerisms, and for gameplay, like, they're basically deciding, how is this player going to interact with the world, and how are these characters going to be, basically in the puzzle that is just the universe that we're making. And if you let those other developers into that story, they'll have a lot of really great ideas as well. And it's something that you can really feel when you're in a studio, whether people are excited by the story or not, and if they're able to connect with it. Because if they are, then you'll start seeing like they'll have ideas for it as well, and you'll start seeing it in places that are outside of just the dialogue. You start seeing it in the way that the characters move and act, and how they're interacting with their environment, and how they're sounding, and it's something that's really beautiful, honestly, when it starts kind of coming together. But again, we're still trying to focus on the story of it. And so we'll talk to the other writers a lot. They'll kind of talk about their experiences with it. And also we'll just do more brainstorming of like, okay, if this is the arc story that we want to tell, what are the perfect places to put it within just the game as a whole? If we're going to be solely focused on like kind of Peter Parker and what he is going through, right now, kind of adjusting to, I mean, he's adjusting to like adulthood. He is no longer a younger adult, and he is he's nailed down how to be Spider-Man, but now he needs to nail down like how to be Peter Parker, and that's something that like he hadn't really thought about before. And so, you don't want to be putting a whole bunch of like Miles's emotional kind of work while you're focused on Peter, because we want the player to be able to like fully feel that and kind of see themselves in those characters. And so if you have like too much going on at the same time, they're not really able to see the full story for what it is. And so it's kind of our job to work with the other game writers to be like, okay, this point in the game is kind of where we have like these characters working this out. And, of course, again, like in the gameplay, this is kind of what's happening next. This is who we're fighting. This is the mission that we're on, etc. And then kind of from there, just trying to find like where those story moments can go in. And there are some times where you start kind of building it out with the character arcs, and you start realizing that what they're going through just isn't necessarily working anymore, or it just doesn't make any sense. If you're making a sequel or something that has like already established characters, you don't want them to regress any further than they have like in previous game installments. What they've learned in the first one should be something that they have nailed down at that point, and you're supposed to be kind of building on it. So there are some instances where we'll be working on something, and then it's like, okay, well, in theory, like this character has kind of like already gone through this, and sometimes they'll have already gone through it like in the story, and so it doesn't make sense to rehash it. And that's kind of when we go in and we go back to the drawing board a little bit on, okay, we want the character to be kind of learning through something, but what is that going to be where it makes sense for one and then also resonates for another? Sorry, that was a very long answer.
No, that was great. Yeah. So coming up with names can be a fun part of writing. For some writers, it's exciting, while for others, it's tedious. So how do you come up with names for characters, weapons, or abilities, or whatever that is inside of the word of the game? What's your advice for anyone struggling with that?
Sounds so bizarre, but I like to just start typing random letters out and then seeing what the letters start looking like in terms of a word, and then kind of editing it from there. So I will just kind of I feel like letters give kind of a different feeling. One thing that I learned when I was working at Hasbro, so I also worked on some board games and card games for a little bit. Something that I learned there is that there are things called like slow letters and then fast letters. And when you are, for example, making a title, you want it to be comprised of fast letters so that it is a fast word. That way it sounds like catchy and fun and like kind of goes with what it is that you're trying to make and like sell to the customer. And so I'll start putting what I would say are like usually some of the fast words, or depending on the character, putting like slow letters in, and then seeing kind of what comes of that. And then, I don't just want it to be like a string of random letters and like consonants, but once I kind of start seeing what the word starts looking like, I'll kind of edit it to go with it. With some things like, some Call of Duty characters, they'll come from different backgrounds. As you know, like a lot of code names kind of come from backstories. And so what I'll do is I'll think of those different letters, and then I'll go into like a thesaurus or something and just start looking up words that are related to what kind of like word storm wise their backstory is, and then using those letters kind of see the words that are associated with it and kind of choose from there. It's a very weird process, but I would fully recommend, just for people in general who are kind of learning about naming things, to learn about slow letters and fast letters, because it's really interesting, and you could see just like phonetically how words like flow once you see it, basically.
Yeah, I never thought about it this way. You know what I'm curious about now is that the for example, CIA operations. Who named those operations and based on what?
I really don't know. Yeah, there have been a lot of operations that I've looked up that I've been kind of like, okay. I don't know what the thinking was behind that. There are some, of course, that they just kind of name after kind of like the major people in it, like it'll be a last name. But some of them are like they're just random.
Yeah. All right.
But you know, I guess they're also not looking at it from a entertainment perspective. So
from marketing perspective.
Exactly. They're not thinking of their slow letters and fast letters.
All right. Now let's talk about your favorites. So, what are some of your favorite games overall, and what was the last game that truly inspired you?
This is my favorite question. I'm gonna try to be. Oh man, well, in terms of like my favorite games, I freaking love Yakuza 0. Oh, it's so damn good. I think it's fucked up that we don't have more games like that, especially in like Western studios, because that means that I don't get to make them. But just being able to make a game that has like so many levels of like ridiculousness to it, but then in its core have a lot of like heart, is really beautiful. I love the Yakuza games. Kind of in a similar vein, but also very different, is a game by Compulsion called We Happy Few. Also has a lot of absurdity, but the core of the story and the city and the people is like very dark and deep. I wish that more games would be made that kind of explore that, because not only are they fun to experience, but they're also fun to write, because that means that you just have like such a variation in kind of what you're working on. I mean, you get to have like these really dark, like vulnerable moments, but then you could also come in on days and be like, okay, what ridiculous thing am I gonna make and work on? And we got to experience that on a much like tamer scale with the SpiderMan games, just because we're all coming together and brainstorming what the random side mission things on like the SpiderMan app are gonna be, and so you get to be a little bit sillier with them, and some of them are, you know, not funny, like they're deep and they're sad and they're very vulnerable, and then there's some that are just like, they're just dumb for the sake of kind of having a fun little romp, and that is like, I love those games. I think just having a break from like all the seriousness is really fun, but then knowing that it's still there too, it just feels, I don't know, it feels like the real world in a way. And then the last game that I played that inspired me, this is a weird answer, but I am actually currently doing night grad school. I'm trying to get a master's in game design, just because I still want to be a writer, but I want to understand just in general how games get made, like from every discipline, because eventually I would like to be in a director role, and I want to be able to be a good director. A lot of people will kind of get like thrown into that role, and it can you can kind of tell in the game sometimes, and so I want to be prepared for an eventuality, hopefully, that I'm in a director role, and I'll be able to kind of see everything from all sides and be able to work with every discipline, not giving things that are like super impossible, but also knowing kind of like how I can push the envelope is really cool. I am in a very, very small cohort, and we've just been kind of, making itty bitty little games, and we're doing them like kind of solo developing. And we just recently had a project where basically we were given the assets and we're just told like, okay, with these, like make a game out of it. And the games that came out of my other 3 students were just so good. I feel like I could just tell from a design standpoint, like what their goal was, and they were able to meet it perfectly just with everything that they had been trying. And you could see it in the art and with the sound, and there were things that they added in the gameplay that I feel like evokes this feeling that I know they were trying to give. And I was just really inspired from that, because again, like I still have a very story set eye, and so it could be more difficult for me to think of the game holistically, because I'm just thinking of like, okay, well, what's the story that I can kind of like attach to this, because that is what I do every day. But when it's coming to just like, I have all of these pieces, and now like, what can I make of it as a game as opposed to just a story? It's such a big task, and being able to see their games, I feel like because I was able to see so clearly their intention, I felt very inspired by that, and I want to be like them.
Wow. Yeah, based on your talent and ambition, I'm sure it's gonna happen very, very, very soon, and I can't wait to see that game. And
Thank you.
one thing that I noticed about your say style of writing, now that I've been talking to you and looking at your films and the work you've done, you always look for humor and some silliness in a serious story. I mean, your examples were like Yakuza and what was the other game? I forgot. Oh, We Happy Few. Yeah. And they're both dealing with that. And even in, for example, in SpiderMan, especially the storylines of Miles, and in Black Ops 6. And in Black Ops 6, there's this fun theme going on between the characters, especially Woods. They're doing operations and everything is fun. And I love this. I think this is your signature, and I can see it everywhere. And it's all over your short films as well.
Thank you so much. That means a whole lot. That is, it's my favorite thing to consume, and it's my favorite thing to make.
Yeah.
Being able to add humor in dark situations is honestly something that we could all use right now.
Exactly. Yeah. Have you? That reminded me. Have you seen that meme from Yakuza where the meme says, "I'm never gonna skip any cutscene in any game again"? And the guy's like they attack the main character and he's about to die, and suddenly the guy skipped the cutscene and he's on a karting.
The go-kart. Yeah.
That was awesome. Yeah, that's the definition of the game.
Yep. 100%. 100%. I haven't played that one specifically because I'm trying to go through them in order, and I'm at like the beginning of 4 right now. And then they keep making more. Every time I finish one, they make another. Like, God damn it.
Yeah. the last one was, I heard, it was a great game. I never was into them. I played a few of them, but not my type of game. But the last one I heard, it's fantastic. I forgot the name of it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting to them. I'm at the point right now where like they haven't really like remastered or remade them. So just like in terms of actually playing the game, it's really hard to go through. But they keep like adding more kind of like to the end of the timeline, and so I'm like, okay, I gotta push through these, and then I'll get back to the really good fun stuff.
Yeah. So, what about films? What are some of your favorite films? Oh, before we talk about films, I watched the interview with you, and behind you was a poster of one of my favorite films, and I was like, I can't
Oh,
believe someone loved that, and I was
it's a
Apollo
hot
10
rod.
and a half.
Oh
Oh,
yes.
I
Oh my
love that
gosh.
movie. I was like, oh my god, and that was a great poster. I was like, I gotta get that.
Oh my gosh. No, not to flex on you, but I actually, while I was in college, I got to intern with Richard Linklater, the director of that, while he was finishing
Oh
up
my god.
that game, or not game, sorry, that film. And so yeah, I got to see like a good chunk of it before it had been rotoscoped
Oh,
and everything.
no way.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
It was so cool.
Dude,
Yeah, he's making cool things.
I love that movie. The crazy thing is, I'm from Iran, right? And I'm a 90s kid. And
Oh,
I'm so obsessed with American 60s. I know all about its politics, about movies, fashion, assassinations, oral murders. I don't know. And that
There's a
movie
lot in the
was
60s.
about growing up in 60s. I was like, oh, this is a dream come true. I love it. I don't know what's going on with that, but
Yeah.
it's so, yeah,
It's
fascinating.
yeah, my dad grew up in the 60s in Houston. So it was like everything
Oh
they were
my God.
doing was like stuff that my dad had
Yeah.
experienced as well.
Uh,
And I was just like, whoa. That's yeah,
eh,
it feels like it's like a lens into his uh almost into his past. Um which is funny because I haven't convinced him to watch it yet.
really?
But
Oh.
yeah, I've tried. And he's like, yeah. I'm like, you're not gonna want. I need
It's
to like
boring.
put it
I
on the television.
experienced it.
Yeah.
So what are your some of your favorite films?
Oh yes. I like Hot Rod. It's yeah, 2007 got Andy Samberg. It was a Lonely Island film. I actually like I love the Lonely Island. Um it's just like a comedy group and they do movies and stuff, but they also were on SNL and did a lot of like SNL sketches and their humor, I don't know. I'm tickled every time. I love their stuff. And so a lot of my favorite movies are things that they made. So they did Pop Star. It's like Never Stop Stopping. It was like a mockumentary. That one's so funny. Crazy enough. Okay, so I really don't judge me. I really like Megamind. I always say I have like chicken
That's
tender
a
taste
great
in
animation.
movies.
Yeah.
Because you know I went to film school and of course everybody's like, oh, you have to watch like Citizen Kane and like all this stuff. Yeah, that's why I say I like chicken tender movies because they're just like the most basic thing. But I feel like Megamind has such a great um you could just very clearly see like all of the story beats and I feel like it's almost like a masterclass in just great writing. Plus, you know, even though it is like a comedy, it is a pretty good commentary just about like being stuck in like the societal kind of like mainframes and kind of being trapped in the status quo because I mean you have Megamind, you have Roxanne Ritchie, and you have Metro Man, and the they had very distinct kind of like roles. You know, you have your villain, you have your damsel in distress, and you have your hero, and none of them wanted to be in those situations. Um, you know, Megamind was just kind of doing it because he was raised to, and then when he realized that he didn't have to do that anymore, he didn't. And when it became something, you know, like real, he was like, "Oh, I don't. This is like not what I wanted. Like this is what actual evil is, and I don't want any part in it." And I think seeing those three characters, kind of navigating that space in different ways is really cool. So I got to give them their flowers always. And then Again, another chicken tender movie. I really like the animated movie Princess and the Frog. I just think like if I could work on any movie, I would want it to be something similar to that. Like we don't do 2D animation anymore, and the just the feeling of like being in New Orleans during this time, really really cool stuff. So yeah. I know those are very strange picks, but those are my picks nonetheless, damn it.
Those were great answers. And people listening to this, oh, this girl wrote Call of Duty. I'm curious about her favorite films and wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, you would think, right?
Yeah. All right. That's it. Thank you so much, Ashley, for your time and sharing your inspiring career with me. Your passion for storytelling in any format is genuine and full of soul. And it was so great and educational to talk with you. And I seriously can't wait to see more of your work and hopefully see you direct a game. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much again for having me.